keep an eye on it. Okay, I probably know what that is.
Hi at home. Good Shabbos. Thanks, Jeff.
Moskowitz is going to be the historian. I've got these going back.
Alex?
All the way. Yeah, Alex.
Okay.
So he said, I told him I had this.
Ooh, those are collector's items.
So he's going to, hopefully, he's going to scan them all.
Oh, cool.
By the way, we chinched down on the room this year. It was very different.
Wait, what?
Chinched out on how much information we can get on there. It's very different this year than the last years.
Okay.
And see the paper quality?
Good Shabbos.
Lots been
I just
changing
wanted to
on
mention, everybody, before Rabbi speaks, we're going to have March 21st, a Shabbat.
The paper quality is worse? It's worse?
Spanish Shabbat, with Spanish food, a special kiddush. It's going to be in here.
Most things are much higher quality than we.
Look at this.
Okay, everybody's welcome.
This piece of paper.
You know, so please come and sign up online.
A cardboard.
So they know how many people they have.
Those were the days.
I don't have any additional flyers. And also we know about tomorrow for the, if Gary is in charge of volunteers at the temple. So if you want to volunteer at the Purim Carnival, talk to Gary. Also, he's running the men's seder.
Talk to Jay. Talk to Jay.
Gary's behind Jay, sorry.
Yeah, have a seat.
Unbelievable. All right. I think we got all the names right. Good Shabbos. All right. Here we go. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Ben Yuven b'nei Yisrael Oti leolam, oti leolam V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Norotam berit olam Uvayom hashvi Shabbat v'nafash Shabbat v'nafash Shabbat v'nafash v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen Amen. Chaim.
Spring break wine.
Okay, Torah Study blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, Torah portion is Kitisa. We're going to look at chapter 32, verse 1 in Exodus. We're almost done with Exodus. Just towards the very end, and we've had a few weeks without much narrative. More just building, construction. I mean, a little bit of narrative in terms of the elevation of the priests, but none of the really famous stories or excitement. However, when you get to Kitisa, there's one of the most famous stories in human history, and that is the story of the golden calf. So, okay, so you've heard it. So you're saying you've heard of it. All right. Now, the story of the golden calf is one of the more perplexing stories. Why, at the moment of revelation, the Jews would give up and turn to an idol to lead them. And there's a question, they say that we want an idol to lead us to replace Moses, because Moses is not coming back down, and we don't know what happened to him, and he's gone. And it's not to replace God, it's to replace Moses. But Moses wasn't a God, he was a person. I mean, he was an unusual person, but he was a person. And now to replace him with an idol seems like many steps backward, and we can talk about, maybe the Jews hadn't quite figured out monotheism as well as we thought, and we're still learning about it. Maybe they're monolatrist, which is a word you learn in rabbinic school. Have you heard this word before, monolatrist? Monolatrist means you believe in many gods, it's just you believe yours is the best, and that it's stronger than all the other ones. That's monolatrism. And maybe that's what Micha Mocha was, because, right, we say Micha Mocha be'elim. If El is God, Elim is gods. Micha Mocha, who is like you, be'elim, amongst the gods, right? Because, so a good question would be, what gods? There are no other gods. Well, maybe when they said Micha Mocha, they weren't quite there yet. Okay, you could argue this, and if you go to HUC, that's what they do argue. Okay. Right. So that's how they talked. Now the question is why. Okay. Now there are two great sins in the Torah that the Jews commit together as a people. The first one is this one, and the second one is the sin of the spies, where we'll see in Shalach Lecha, the best Torah portion in the Torah, which also happened to be my bar mitzvah portion. But Shalach Lecha is the sin for which the Jews are told to wander for 40 years in the wilderness because of it. The sin of the golden calf is forgiven, with the exception of those who actually created the calf and the ringleaders who are killed by a plague at the end of the Torah portion. The Jews are forgiven, and they're still on their way to Israel. And there's an interesting message there that God says, if you sin against me, I'll get over it. If you create another God and then you sin and you repent, then I'll get over it. But if you sin against the land of Israel, that can't be forgiven. And when you refuse to go to the land of Israel, fine, then you're never going to go, and you're going to wander for 40 years, and only your kids are going to go. But I want to suggest a different way of looking at the golden calf this morning that maybe you've never seen before. Now, when we see, there's this famous line that when they threw the gold into the fire, nobody stood there with a chisel and made the calf. It wasn't like Abraham's father's idol shop, where he sat and made idols and then sold them. It says that it just popped out. It just showed up. And that something magical happened that caused the gold that Aaron threw into the fire to just come out in the shape of a calf. And so one of the traditional answers is, well, the people who were involved with creating the calf were the Chartumim. Who are the Chartumim? The Chartumim are outstanding, advanced. Now, the magicians made up a class of people in Egypt who are also referred to as the Eruv Rav, the mixed multitudes. Those Egyptians who saw the magic and the power of Moses as God and said, when the Jews left Egypt, we're going with them and we're converting to that. Now, but who were those Egyptians who decided to do that? They were the people who in Egypt made up this caste called the Chartumim. They were from this magic tradition. They believed in black magic. The Torah believes that there is something called black magic. That's why 2 of the 613 mitzvot are don't do black magic. You don't need mitzvahs for things you can't do. You don't need 2 mitzvahs to tell you don't do black magic if there's no such thing as black magic. So if you're going home and playing Ouija board after this, that's a problem. You can't do that. You can go eat a cheeseburger. That we don't mind, apparently. That seems to be acceptable these days. You can go to Joe's, right, and post on Facebook that you're eating crab on Pesach with bread. That's no problem. But if you go home and use a Ouija board, you've made a mockery of the Torah. That's my take on Reform Judaism. Okay, vote for me. Slate 3. Okay. If the feeling is that when they left Egypt and they were caught up in this magic of, oh my goodness, Moses, God, can do things that even, we could do the thing with the snake and, we could turn a cup of water into blood, but once they got to the lice, their God's way powerful than us. Let's go out and we'll be with them. But they never quite left the black magic. And when the mixed multitude led the crowd at the golden calf and said, oh my gosh, Moses is gone, and reverted back to the black magic, when the gold got thrown into the fire, in order to get it to pop out as a calf, you need someone who knows black magic who could say the right spells and get it to pop out. And that's one of the traditional views, but today I want to suggest something different. Okay? So, that's an introduction to what the golden calf is, although this is one story that for sure you've heard before. So let's take a look. We got a lot to get to. There's 2 sheets. Hopefully everyone has both sheets. So Mindy was out of town. Mindy Robbins, she's Orthodox. She celebrates 27 days of Purim. So she, had she been here, they would have been stapled. But when Mindy's out of the building, things literally fall apart. All right, I'll be here all week. Okay, chapter 32, verse 1, Norman, of Exodus. Here we go.
When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that fellow Moses, the envoy who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him. Aaron said to them, you men, take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. Okay,
so I don't want to get too much into, I want to focus on something else today, but everybody loves to, accuse Aaron and so forth. The general understanding of this is the women were more spiritual than the men. So, and the women didn't participate in the sin. So if Aaron said, go get your gold from your women, the women would say, what do you need my gold for? They said, well, we're making an idol. And then the woman said, no, you're not. You can't do that because we're more spiritual than you, and that's wrong, and you can't do that. And that would delay the building of whatever they wanted to do. And in the time that he could cause the delay, he figured Moses would be back in time. But the men, in their zeal, didn't ask the women for their gold. They grabbed the gold and took it. And this is another highlight here of how the men are guilty of this sin, but the women were not. But Aaron, the goal was to try to... Now, the Midrash says that Hur, the son of Miriam, tried to stop them completely, and they killed Hur. So Aaron said, I'm going to try a different strategy because otherwise they're going to kill me too. So his strategy was... Now, I don't know if you remember, but many years ago, my professor... it might have been when I was installed... my professor from rabbinic school, Jonathan Cohen, was here. And the week that he was here was this Torah portion. Might have been one other time when he was here a couple times. And he was teaching this. And one of the ideas that he suggested was that if Aaron didn't come up with something to stall them, they would have looked up and said, Moses is gone. This thing, Judaism, whatever you want to call it, it's over. There is no Torah. There's nothing. He's gone. And they just would have left. They said, all right, let's pack it up. There's nothing else going on here. It's boring out here anyway. We're in the middle of the wilderness. Let's pack it up. And they would have gone their separate ways. That would have been the end of the Jewish people right there. So Aaron had to do something to stall, to keep them there. And even if that meant building an idol, he needed to keep them there. Because if they all would have said it's over and they left, that would have been the end. So that's another, you could take it or leave it, but that was one perspective that he brought. And I'm certain that he had 4,000 sources to prove it to you. Okay, let's keep going though. Verse 3.
And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. This he took from them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of the Eternal." Early the next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink, and then rose to dance.
Okay, now, the dancing, so actually Rashi says here, this is, the word in Hebrew is litzachek, which means to laugh. But we see it elsewhere in the Torah where it means to commit adultery. You know, that's what they were doing. It was more like, it was an orgy, basically. And they had also killed Hur, and they had also worshipped idols. Now, does anyone know what the 3 cardinal sins in Judaism are? Murder, idol worship, and adultery. They committed all 3 of the cardinal sins, according to the rabbis. So this is not our finest moment as a people. Okay, now, here's a question I want to ask. Do you think, maybe, I don't know if you've ever overlooked this or not. Have you ever thought about this question? Of all the things they could have made, of all the things that the idol could have resembled, why a calf? What's a calf? Why specifically a calf? Okay, now don't answer, because maybe one of you know, and we still have 39 minutes left. And if you give it away now, it'll ruin everything. But I don't know if you've ever considered this before. But what exactly is the symbolism of a calf? Now, according to the Talmud, one of the worst Jewish guys in all of history was Jeroboam. Have any of you ever heard of Jeroboam, or in Hebrew, Yeravam? Who was Jeroboam? He's a disaster, according to the rabbis. Also according to the Bible, 1 Kings. Okay, so here's what happened. Here's what happened. King Saul's the first king, doesn't work out. King David is the second king, it's excellent. A couple bad moments, but for the most part, went down in history as our best king. He has a son named Solomon. Solomon also starts off great. Most of it is great. The ending is not so good. he has a son named Rehoboam. Rehoboam tells the people, my father oppressed you, I'm going to oppress you even more. Well, the Jews in the north said, we're not that interested in that. That doesn't sound that great. By the way, the Jews in the north was all of them, pretty much. 10 tribes lived in the north. And something happens where a prophet, who's a legitimate prophet, comes to Jeroboam. And Jeroboam doesn't start off as a bad guy. He starts off as a good guy. So just to give you a time frame, King David founds Jerusalem in the year 1000 BCE. He rules as king in total for 40 years and dies in 960. In 960, Solomon becomes king and also rules for 40 years until 920. In 920, Rehoboam becomes king, but then the kingdom splits, right? Like North Carolina and South Carolina, or North Dakota and South Dakota, whichever you prefer. Now we have two kingdoms. The northern kingdom is called Israel, and the southern kingdom is called Judea. The southern kingdom's power base was in the West Bank, which is why the West Bank is known as Judea and Samaria. Right? By the way, there are another group of people who came from Samaria called Samaritans. And you know who one of them was? Haman. Haman was... It was not a good one. No, it was not a... You know, of the good Samaritans, there was only one good one. You know, the rest of them were, you know, that's why they call him the Good Samaritan. They couldn't believe it. Like, oh my God, you're the only one. You know, but there's a bit there, I think. So, there are two stories of calves in the Torah. Oh, I'm sorry, let me say that again. There are two stories of calves in the Tanakh. Not that there's only one in the Torah. The one in the Torah is about the golden calf. The one about, the other one, sorry, let me say it again. Calves that are turned into idols. There are two stories of calves that are turned into idols. One is the golden calf, and the other one is a story that happens in 1 Kings called to Jeroboam. And if you figure out what the calf, if you figure out what they have in common, you can learn what the calf is. But I would suggest that as we read the story of the golden calf, if we don't know specifically what the calf represents, then we can't fully understand the story of the golden calf. And all these years that we thought we understood the entire story of the golden calf, we were missing one of the main parts, which is what's the point of the calf? Because it could have been anything, right? Okay, so I brought for you two sections of 1 Kings that tell the story of Jeroboam. So that's our, I'd like to look first. This is 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 29 through 39. So Edith, you just take us through this section. I'll explain a little bit as we go.
During that time, Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, and the prophet Ahijah of Shiloh met him on the way. He had put on a new robe, and when the two were alone in the open country, Ahijah took hold of the new robe he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces.
Okay, so if Jeroboam was in Jerusalem, would that be, once the kingdoms were separated, the southern kingdom of Judah or the northern kingdom of Israel? Southern, very good. So it's important to understand, if you control the southern kingdom, Judah, then you control the Holy Temple. That's a pretty big power base, right? You control the Holy Temple. Okay, so I just want to point that out so far.
Take 10 pieces, he said to Jeroboam, for thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, I'm about to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hands, and I will give you 10 tribes, but one tribe shall remain his, for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel.
Okay, so if you can do this kind of math in your head, Jeroboam is being told King Solomon at the end of his life worshipped idols. He did a lot of bad things at the end of his life. So he's going to forfeit. However, I still love King David. So for the sake of King David, I'm going to keep the south as Judah. The other 10 tribes are going to go with you, and you're going to be the king of them. The tribe of Levi doesn't inherit land. So that's why we're only looking at 11 tribes and not 12. And the Levites basically stayed in the south with Judah. By the way, that's why they're still Levites today and Kohens, because the Judeans were the ones in the south, and the Levites were there too. The 10 tribes of the north become the 10 lost tribes, and none of them exist anymore. That's why we're not called Israelites anymore, because the only Jews who were left in the world were people from Judea. And if you're from Judea, then you're called Jewish, right? Unless you're kind of Jewish, but you haven't totally converted, and then you're also Jewish. Right. Okay. Okay, let's keep going.
For they have forsaken me. They have worshipped Ashtoreth,
Yes.
the goddess of the Phoenicians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the Ammonites.
Yeah, Milcom was like a tech guy.
They have not walked in my
There's a .com, yeah. Okay, it doesn't matter.
They have walked in my ways, they have not walked in my ways, or done what is pleasing to me, or kept my laws and rules, as his father David did.
Right, in other words, when Solomon's kingdom was coming to an end, he led his people towards other gods. Okay.
However, I will not take the entire kingdom away from him, but will keep him as ruler as long as he lives, for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose, and who kept my commandments and my laws. But I will take the kingship out of the hands of his son and give it to you, the 10 tribes. To his son I will give one tribe, so that there may be a lamp for my servant David forever before me in Jerusalem, the city where I have chosen to establish my name. But you have been chosen by me. Reign wherever you wish, and you shall be king over Israel. If you heed all that I command you and walk in my ways and do what is right in my sight, keeping my laws and commandments as my servant David did, then I will be with you, and I will build for you a lasting dynasty, as I did for David. I hereby give Israel to you, and I will chastise David's descendants for that sin, though not forever.
Okay, so far, Jeroboam looks like a good guy. A real prophet came to him and said, they're worshiping idols. We need to get away from that, so I'm going to put the power base by you, and you're going to, presumably you're someone who's not going to worship idols. Okay, so that's how it starts. Now, let's see how it goes. We skip ahead 11 chapters in the book of Kings to chapter 12. And Judy, if you could take us to the second portion. And now we're going to find out, now this is going to become more interesting for our purposes as we look at Ki Tisa.
But the word of God came to Shemaiah the man of God. Say to King Rehoboam, son of Solomon of Judah, and to all the house of Judah and Benjamin and the rest of the people, thus said the Lord, you shall not set out to make war on your kinsmen the Israelites. Let every man return to his home, for this thing has been brought about by me. They heeded the word of the Lord and turned back, in accordance with the word of the Lord. Jeroboam fortified Shechem in the hill city of Ephraim, and resided there. He moved out from there and fortified Penuel. Jeroboam said to himself, now the kingdom may well return to the house of David. If these people still go up to offer sacrifices at the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, the heart of these people will turn back to their master, King Rehoboam of Judah, and they will kill me and go back to King Rehoboam of Judah.
Okay, so you just see there, the kingdom is now split. Rehoboam is the king of the south. Jeroboam is the king of the north. They're both legitimate. Nobody's done anything wrong yet. God tells them don't fight with each other because they might have had a tendency to do that, and now they're not going to. However, if you're the king of the north, you've got one big problem. That your people sometimes need to go south. Why they need to go south? To offer sacrifices in Jerusalem, or for the pilgrimages, or for whatever they needed, but also to offer their tithing and all the different things that they need to offer has to go to Jerusalem. Well, now to get to Jerusalem, you're going to have to pay taxes. if you're a citizen of the north. And who's that tax money going to go to? The south. The last thing in the world you want is all of your money and all of your animals and everything that you have going and spending time investing in the south and not in the north. So Jeroboam has a real problem. Okay, so that's where we are so far. Now, he's still a good guy until he recognizes this problem, and now we're going to see what's going to happen. So now watch what happens.
So the king took counsel and made 2 golden calves.
You see that? He took counsel and made 2 golden calves. Now, if you're Jeroboam, let's say you've read the Torah before. Let's say at least you're somewhat familiar with the Torah. And you build a golden calf. Don't you think someone might have said, too soon? Right? Yeah. I mean, did you not get that? All right, because it was funny. Really? A golden calf? How's that gone in the past? That's what you're doing? So he must have had a reason. That's what we're trying to figure out. But if we figure out what his reason is, we can also figure out what the reason was of the Israelites in the first place when they built the golden calf at the base of Mount Sinai. Okay, clear so far? Okay, all right, let's keep going.
He said to the people, "You have been going up to Jerusalem long enough. This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." He set up one in Bethel and placed the other in Dan. That proved to be a cause of guilt, for the people went to worship the calf at Bethel and the one at Dan. He also made cult places and appointed priests from the ranks of the people who were not of Levite descent.
Okay, so I didn't bring the verse numbers here, but from the point where he said, on the first page, so the king took counsel. I don't know who these people he was counseling with were, but they're probably not enjoying the afterlife. He says, okay, this is a simple solution. Our people need to go to Jerusalem because they need a holy temple and they need to offer sacrifices, and we need people to be the ones who do the sacrifices and so forth. So they need to go to Jerusalem and make use of the Levites and the Kohens. You know, the Kohens come from the tribe of Levi, right? Obviously, because they come from Aaron. So Jeroboam says, well, we could just have our own temple here. And okay, so our Levites aren't going to be real Levites, but who cares? Okay, and all of a sudden, Jeroboam went from the guy that was chosen by God through a prophet to go against the house of Judah, who was sinning with idols, to sinning with idols himself in order to keep that power base. Right? And now he's become a bad guy. Okay, so we see what he's done. We know why. The real reason is because he doesn't want his people going south and using the temple and paying their taxes there and bringing all their stuff there. I don't know, taxes, they had sun pass, but, the sun, when they crossed into Judah. So now he makes these cult places and he appoints priests from the ranks of people, and the Tanakh comes to specifically tell us that they were not of Levite descent. Okay, let's keep going.
He stationed at Bethel the priests of the shrines that he had appointed to sacrifice to the calves that he had made. And Jeroboam established a festival on the 15th day of the eighth month, in imitation of the festival of Judah. He established one at Bethel, and he ascended the altar there. On the 15th day of the 8th month, the month in which he had contrived of his own mind to establish a festival for the Israelites, Jeroboam ascended the altar that he had made in Bethel.
Okay. Now, we understand what he did. We understand why he did it. And it was a disaster because the people started worshiping idols and God allowed them to be destroyed. about 200 years later by the Assyrians, 723 BCE, and the entire northern kingdom is destroyed. They all assimilate into Assyria, never to be heard of again. Unless we believe that one of the tribes was the tribe that ended up in Africa and were the Jews from Ethiopia, who basically we do believe that they're one of the lost tribes. But other than them, they're all lost. They assimilate into Assyrian culture and they're gone. So this is the beginning of the end for the northern kingdom. The Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, who lived just after Maimonides, has a comment on verse 28. Look what he says here. Yeravam, meaning Yeravam is the Hebrew of Jeroboam, told them. Now we're going to make a comparison between the calf of Aaron and the two calves of Jeroboam. Aaron made Israel a calf on which the Shekhinah, meaning God's presence, would be manifest in place of Moses, who they lacked. You too lack the place of the Shekhinah, meaning Jerusalem. So let us make a calf in its place for the Shekhinah to be manifest. So what he says is, all right, here's why he made a calf. Because Aaron's idea was, if Moses represents God, and by the way, he does. Remember when he comes down from the mountain, his face is shining. He has to wear that mask. It was good when we did that portion during COVID. Moses was wearing. Okay. He comes down we made that comparison a few years ago. Comes down the mountain, represents the Shekhinah, God's presence. Now, I don't want to give this away because I'm going to use this for my Devar Torah in the conservative minyan. So if you're going to the conservative minyan, you'll hear some of this twice. But the Talmud, in a tractate called Chulin, there's a very famous section, page 139 in Chulin, and it talks about all of the different places where the characters of Purim are mentioned in the Torah, that they're foreshadowed in the Torah. So the way you say from the tree, when Adam and Eve took the fruit from the tree, the way you say the type from the tree is the, min, the type of eitz. Hamin ha'etz, from the type of tree. Hamin, Haman. All right. Now, when they took, but it's spelled the same way. Hamin, and the vowels are different, but the letters are He Mem Nun. And so the rabbis of the Talmud say that's a foreshadowing of Haman. Why? Because Hamin ha'etz. When Adam and Eve took from the tree, they removed God's presence from the world. And that's what Haman is. Tries to remove God's presence from the world. So when did God's presence come back into this world? In this week's Torah portion, which always comes out during Purim. There's a phrase in this week's Torah portion that says more drawer. More drawer. Do you know what more is? More is frankincense. And drawer is like resting. But in Aramaic, more is more. But drawer is dachia. More dachia. Right. That's how you say it in Aramaic. More dachia, which means now what does that have to do with anything? So it says Mordachia, they put the incense on top of, when they first made a sacrifice and they put it on top, they put the incense on it so that it would smell good when it went up to God. But when did God's presence come back in this world? When they offered that first sacrifice. That's Mordechai. Haman's the one who's trying to take the Shekhinah, the presence of God, out of the world. Mordechai, Moses, this week's Torah portion, is the one who's bringing God's presence into the world. Pretty unbelievable explanation of the Torah. Okay, so The point, though, is that Moses represents God's presence. And Jeroboam says, well, if they replace Moses, who represents God's presence, with a calf, and I'm trying to replace the place where God's presence is, the holy temple, I should use a calf also. That's the Radak. You can take it or leave it. Now, here's the final question that I want to ask to try to explain what's really going on here, and that is, why a calf? So if you wanted to know why exactly a calf, what you should do is look throughout the Torah or the Tanakh and see what are the different contexts in which calves are used. So I brought a couple. The first one is from Malachi, chapter 3, verse 20. And it says this, but for you who revere my name, a son of victory shall rise to bring blessing. You shall go forth and stamp like stall-fed calves. Now, stall-fed means they don't have to go out and find their food on their own. It means they're pampered. So a calf, the first adjective I could say about calves from this verse in Malachi is calves refer to animals who are pampered. Okay? Pampered. They're well taken care of. Okay? That's the first thing I could say. Okay. Next one. Judges 14:18. He said to them, had you not plowed with my female calf, you would not have found out my riddle. Okay. Now, this is a promiscuous female calf. That's what's being referred to. But in a way that shows that the calf is immature. So far we have pampered and immature. All right? Seventh grader. All right, you guys don't teach here. Okay, so that's what we have so far. The Midrash. Why was she called Eglah? Eglah, you know how to say golden calf in Hebrew? Egel hazahav. Zahav is gold, and Egel is a calf. Eglah is a female calf. Now, there was someone in the Tanakh whose nickname was Eglah, the female calf. Why was she called an Eglah? Just as a calf does not accept a yoke upon her neck, so Michal did not accept the yoke of her father, rather she angered him. Michal was the daughter of? Very good. You just knew that? Well done. Michal is the daughter of Saul, who marries David. And Saul didn't want her to marry David. Saul didn't like David. But she didn't listen to her father, and she did what she wanted to do. So her nickname is Eglah, because she didn't listen to her father and did what she wanted to do, so she's called a calf. So what do I know about a calf? A calf is someone who's immature, pampered, doesn't listen to parents. That's a calf. That's what I have so far. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. Do you know that any of you ever been to Hadassah Hospital to see the Chagall windows? Okay. Diane, you familiar with that institution? You've heard of Hadassah Hospital? Okay. How many of you have seen the Chagall windows? Okay. What's on each one? Well, they're all different. Yeah. If you're a fan of Chagall, right. Correct. The 12 tribes, and they each have their own image, right? Like Judah's the lion. That's why the representation of Jerusalem is a lion, because that Judah was the possession of the tribe of Judah. But they each have their own image, and a lot of them have to do with different animals, right? Naphtali was a fish. Why? Because they inherited the land, they inherited the Sea of Galilee, and they were in charge of all the fishing, right? Zebulun, I think, was a fox because they were hunters, right? So they all have their different whatever. Joseph was an ox, right? That's just the terminology that he gets. So I just want to show you a couple of verses. I didn't bring them with me, but I did look it up. If you just jump back with me in Genesis to chapter 49. Remember at the end of Genesis where Jacob gives a blessing to each tribe? And the character of that tribe forever is based on this blessing that Jacob gives each tribe. So, if anyone could find Genesis 49:22. 3:10. 3:10? Okay. Anyone have a mic? Ken, do you have it? Could you read verses 22 to 26? We're talking now about Jacob's blessing to Joseph.
Joseph is a wild ass by a spring, wild colts on a hillside.
Okay, so actually that's all I need.
Okay.
He's a young wild animal. That's Joseph. Now, what does the Torah say about him? In chapter 37 of Genesis, it says he was a youth. And how does youth end up for him? Not that great, right? Look at Rashi on the bottom of the first page. The bottom of the back page here says, see where it says Rashi on 37:2? And he was a youth. He acted like a youth, fixing his hair, rubbing his eyes to look good. You know what? So Joseph's an ox, right? By the way, later on in Deuteronomy, it refers to him as an ox. If you don't believe me, you can look in Deuteronomy 33, verses 13 to 17. And that's where it tells us that Joseph is the ox. And if you go to Jerusalem and you look at the Chagall window and you see Ephraim and Manasseh represent Joseph, you're going to see oxen. Okay? He's the ox. That's his sign. However, wasn't always an ox. Because first, to be an ox, you have to be a baby. And when you're a baby, you're a calf. So who's Joseph? In Genesis, he's a calf. He's wild. He's a youth. He's fixing his hair. And things go terribly for him. Later in life, he's an ox. And he's a genius. And he has great wisdom. And he becomes the head of Egypt, besides Pharaoh. And he's an agricultural expert. And everything. He's great at the end. But not always. It takes him a while to get there. Now remember, in the beginning, he wasn't that great, right? Early he was wild, didn't listen to his father, all these things. And that's what a calf is. A calf is pampered. A calf is immature. A calf doesn't listen to his parents, like Michal. Clear so far? Okay. So now that we know what a calf is, that the calf represents youth and inexperience and immaturity, now we can go back and reapply that interpretation to why Aaron made a calf and why Jeroboam made a calf. And so the first thing we say is, well, Aaron didn't make a calf. It just popped out. And if it just popped out, that meant that the Khartoumim were doing it. But what were they really saying? Do you remember when Nadav and Avihu offered, we're going to see it later, but remember when they offered that strange fire and they get zapped and they die? And one of the explanations is that, there are lots of different opinions of the rabbis. One of them is they were drunk, but the other opinion is that they said, when are Moses and Aaron going to die so that we can take over? When are they going to get out of the way so that we can move up? And as soon as they say that, they get zapped because they're young and inexperienced. And they're not ready to be Moses and Aaron. Moses was an old man. At the time of Revelation, Moses was considered in those days old. How do I know that? Because he was 80 years old, and active military service in the Torah is 20 to 60. He's 20 years too old to be in the military. So he's considered for those times old. What happened at Mount Sinai, the golden calf, wasn't so much about replacing Moses because he was representative of God. It was about replacing him because he was old. And the young calves wanted to take over. Who's Jeroboam? Jeroboam's a young guy who says, enough of King David, enough of King Solomon, enough of that line. I, as a young man, am ready to take over. And so the calf represents young, pampered, inexperienced, and immature. And that's why a calf. Amazing, right? Now, there's one more piece to this. So, I don't know if you remember from Genesis this story, but, well, we know the famous story that Sarah's not able to get pregnant. And then, immediately after she's abducted by Pharaoh, she gets pregnant. And there was a fear that people would say Abraham wasn't able all these years to get her pregnant. One night with Pharaoh, she's pregnant. Isaac is really the son of Pharaoh. So that was the fear. So the Torah says specifically that Isaac looked just like Abraham, and that God fashioned him to look exactly like his father. And he looked so much like his father that, you couldn't, nobody would ever say that because it was obvious. So if you look at, I brought two midrashim to end here from Genesis Rabbah. The first one is, a son in his old age. Now the word in Hebrew, zaken, means old, but it can also mean a beard. Zaken can also be a beard. The sign of, and I think, one of the reasons why Orthodox men have beards is because it represents wisdom. It represents that you're older and that you've learned more. But look what it says. This teaches that Isaac's facial features were similar to his. So it's indicated in the Torah that God made Isaac look exactly like Abraham. Now the Midrash goes on and said that what happened was even when Abraham was older, people confused him for Isaac. And people would come up to him and say, Isaac, how's it going? He'd say, I'm Abraham. When I'm with my dad, before I had glasses and when I had contact lenses and hair, we looked like two different people. But then when I had no hair and I do have glasses, we look identical. And people look at us and like, wow, before and after, unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Okay. So Isaac and Abraham, they looked, and Abraham was annoyed that people thought that he looked like Isaac. Not because he didn't love Isaac, he loved Isaac more than anyone. He was offended when people thought he looked like Isaac. So why be offended? Who doesn't want to look younger? Abraham didn't want to look younger. To him, looking younger was an insult. So look at the next midrash. Rabbi Yehuda bar Simon said, Abraham demanded aging. Right? He said, I demand you make me look older than Isaac. He said before him, Master of the universe, a man and his son enter a place, and no one knows which of them to honor. Because you adorn him with aging, a person knows who to honor. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, as you live, you have demanded a good thing, and it will begin with you. From the beginning of the book until that point, aging is not written. When Abraham stood, he granted him aging, and Abraham was old. So he granted his wish, and Abraham looked older. But when Abraham said, if I look young, then people will think I'm inexperienced, I'm immature, I'm pampered, I'm young, I don't have the experience I deserve to be a leader. That's not what I want. I want to look older so that people will recognize that I'm experienced, that I'm mature, and that I'm a leader. And so the golden calf episode was about saying we Jews have moved on, or we Israelites have moved on from Moses. We don't need his wisdom. We're going to try it our way. Well, Moses came back down and said, I don't think so. But Jeroboam comes later and says, that idea still exists. That you could be you could try to be a leader and think that you're prepared to be a leader when you don't yet have the qualifications to be a leader. And to be a leader without paying your dues and going about it the right way is the absolute wrong way. And if the Jewish people have leaders who don't have the proper qualifications, who don't have the proper experience, who don't have the prerequisites of wisdom and so forth, then you're going to end up like Jeroboam. You're going to do things the wrong way, and pretty soon you're going to be conquered and you're not going to exist anymore because you have basically the blind leading the blind. And Abraham came and said, God forbid someone should think that I don't have maturity and wisdom. And I much rather look like an old man who's wise than a shiny young man who looks great but doesn't have the experience to be a leader. And that's what the golden calf may represent. That's why it had to be a calf to teach us that lesson. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
Test, test. Check, 1, 2, 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 check, check, check.